Alright guys, so we are going to go over contextual influences. Okay. This slide then you had last week, and you had questions to answer for an assignment. So contextual influences are very important. They kind of have taken on the surge in the education world, especially with social studies and English. They're important because in order to understand what you're reading or where your author was coming from, you need to know the things that were going on around them. So what do I mean when I say universal? Okay. There are things that are universal. Universal means that they will last throughout time. Okay, so whether it's art, music, literature, they will last throughout time. They're legendary, and they apply to everybody. So if you take a book, okay, and you take the themes out of that book, someone that is in Russia, okay, can understand the themes if the book was written in America, because it applies to everybody. So it's hard to say something is universal because usually it means it outlasts us. Okay. So Elvis Presley is one in question. Is he universal? Is he legendary? Well, he was for one or two generations, but he's kind of sliding off the recognition scale. Okay, so when you think of universal and legendary, you need to think, okay, will someone 100 years from now still consider this as great as we do now? Okay, we already talked about this. Sometimes in English class, we have to read things that are very, what we consider dry or boring, or what's the point? There's no action. Part of that problem is if you don't understand what was going on in the culture, in the government, in religion at the time that the author's point of view is happening, then it's going to make that the message in the book harder to understand. Okay, this happens a lot when we start reading things that are over 100 years old. Okay, because we get lost in things like language. Okay, or a lot of items that we don't use anymore. So as the author is writing the book, and what was well known 100 years ago is not that way now, and we kind of get lost in it, and it makes the legendary aspect of that book harder to pick up. Okay, so what are contextual influences? Okay, over in this white box, okay, what was happening at the moment in time? Religion, government, social norms, global issues, education, family relationships. So all of these change over time, especially social norms tends to change very quickly, and this global issues is something that's kind of new, because if you wrote a book 100 years ago, it wasn't necessarily had a global aspect. Okay, it was centered right here in America, or right where it was written. But now, today, okay, we don't look at ourselves like that. We look at ourselves as a global community. And then, why are they important? One, they're important because you need to know what happened in history at that point. Okay, it's not a matter of just being so smart that you always know what happened. No, it's a matter of, humans and society are supposed to progress forward. And gosh, it just seems like we keep making the same mistakes. So if you don't have a acknowledgement of how we have progressed, then, who's to say where we go next? There's some big things about contextual influences that are very controversial. So there's a lot of banned books and censored books. There's a lot of books that teachers won't do. And one of the reasons is because of language or norms that were presented in the book. So if you look at some of the books from the late 1800s, okay, they use language that is not acceptable today, right? But at that time, when the book was written, it was a norm. It was accepted. So because the author used, let's just be blunt, because the author used the N-word in the writing, there's a difference between using it as a totally derogatory piece, like he or she is trying to insult somebody, and just using it because that was a common word of the day. Does not make that person, okay, what we consider a racist today. So when you have contextual influences, you have to take that into consideration. There's a book called The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath. And the book deals with mental illness and depression and risky behaviors for females at that time. And so the book, a lot of people won't teach it because, do you really want to get in a discussion about depression and, Sylvia Plath wound up killing herself. But again, that book was written 70 to 80 years ago. Okay. So I am going to bring up an example. Okay. If you know who these guys are, okay. So, this is very relevant to today. It is amazing that you go back 30 years and what was looked at as criminal and violent behavior, okay, because of their attitude towards police, was not acceptable. Right? It was not acceptable. It made people very angry. However, if you fast forward to 2020, the lyrics of some of their songs have become very relevant. Okay? Because it's become more acceptable to believe that there's police brutality out there. That African Americans suffer more at the hands of people in power. And something needs to be done. And they were saying this 30 years ago. Okay, so their contextual influences for that song, it has changed over the 30 years and made it more relevant. Made it so that it was more universal. Okay, a wider audience can connect to the lyrics. So that is one thing that is kind of an example of contextual influences. Hopefully, their lyrics will go down in history, and 50 years from now, people will say, that was how it was then. And it's very different now. Okay. Lovely, lovely. So we're going to move on to your assignment.